broad bipartisan support, we've not been able to have any legislation come to the floor. Leader McConnell has not brought a single piece of election security legislation to the floor, even though the president's own security team has said that we are in jeopardy. Matter of fact, it appears that the majority leader at behests of the White House has made it his goal to kill any meaningful legislation and any efforts to make sure that our nation is fully protected from another attack on our democracy. And we all simply ask why. The truth is, this president seems incapable of accepting the unanimous consensus of the prior administration's intelligence leadership and his own intelligence leadership about what Russia did in the past, and chances are will do it again. As recently as the last international meeting, we saw the president, rather than taking on Vladimir Putin, joking about Russian interference. That does not make our nation safer. So, the bills that my colleagues and I are proposing are largely bipartisan. We're talking about low-hanging fruit that if it came to the floor of the Senate, they would all pass, I think, with close to 80-plus votes. We're saying in terms of election security, every American should have an auditable paper trail, paper ballot after their vote. We're saying, and Senator Klobuchar and I have been working on this, if there is an ad, political ad, that pops up on a social media site and it's being paid for out of St. Petersburg, Americans ought to have that information. We're saying that if Russia attacks us again, there ought to be no question that Russia ought to face immediate sanctions, so they know that if they attack us, we'll take action. And we're saying that if a foreign power reaches out to any campaign and offers them dirt on their opposition, the response ought to not be to say thank you. The response ought to be to tell law enforcement. The truth is, what happened in 2016 will happen again in 2020. There's nothing Republican or Democrat or conservative or liberal about protecting the sanctity of our elections and the sanctity of the ballot box. The only people that are stopping these kind of common sense measures from becoming law of the land are Leader McConnell and President Trump. And we're calling on Leader McConnell to make sure that this legislation that all of my colleagues have put together actually gets a chance to be voted on the full floor of the Senate. And I want to particularly thank Congressman Sarbanes, who's taken an enormous leadership role in the House where they have passed this kind of effective legislation. I now want to turn it over to one of my original partners in this area, the ranking member of the Rules Committee, Senator Klobuchar.
All right. Thank you so much, Senator Warner, and thank you for leading this effort for so long. I just came from the Judiciary Committee where we questioned Director Wray about this specific issue, and you should look at the tape and the transcript, but I asked him, would it be helpful to have backup paper ballots in terms of our security, and he said yes. And then I asked him, would it be helpful to have disclosure when it comes to political ads on social media sites? And he said yes, more information is always helpful. Okay, that is the head of the FBI. And you add in what we already know, that Director Coates has told us that the Russians are getting bolder. You add in Director Mueller's statement in that report that we will hear more about tomorrow, where he said the Russians were invading our election in a systemic and sweeping fashion. We know this is more than meddling with that is what the president was joking about with Vladimir Putin at the G20. No, this was an invasion of our election. And they didn't use tanks or missiles, but they used a cyber attack. And I want to back up what Senator Warner just said, because I actually, as a former prosecutor, have the evidence and the exhibits to give you today about Mitch McConnell and the White House blocking our attempts to make changes. We now, just to back up, we know we have 11 states that have no or partial paper ballot backups. We have 16 states that have no statewide audit requirement. We've introduced several bills. Senator Wyden and I just introduced another bill which contains some very important audit requirements as well as some other standards that would be helpful when it comes to establishing what election equipment and what standards we want with our election equipment. But that aside, here's my evidence for you. Number one, we were very close to getting audits required if states got any federal money, right? That bill was headed to a markup in the Rules Committee. Chairman Blunt called the markup. What happened? Don McGahn made calls to Republican senators. I know this, they won't deny it because they told me it happened. He made calls, he claimed he was calling from his personal capacity. He was the White House counsel. That is not a personal capacity. It was also out there that Mitch McConnell was stopping that bill. He didn't want it to advance. So I know with our bill that was bipartisan, that would have passed, as Senator Warner just pointed out, with overwhelming support, we were stopped in our tracks by those two forces. Then recently, when we had a briefing about this issue, and I was asked about the second bill, I was asking about it, the Honest Ads Act. I won't reveal what happened at the briefing except to say that Leader McConnell once again shut me down from asking those questions. Well, he didn't. I kept doing it, but tried to shut me down and said that's just a campaign finance matter. It's not just a campaign finance matter. When you have foreign countries using rubles to buy ads on the internet and you don't know what they are or who paid for them, that is not just a campaign finance matter. That is a matter of national security. And that is why it is so critical that we move ahead on this national security legislation, which would protect our elections in two major ways. One is from actual physical hacking, and the other is from the insidious propaganda that Russia and other forces are going to be putting out on social media in 2020, when we have absolutely nothing to protect us, when $3 to $4 billion is going to be spent on ads on the media, on the social media sites. Thank you very much, and thank you, Senator Warner. And next, Senator Durbin.
Thank you. When it comes to election security, Republican leader Mitch McConnell is not afraid of the Russians. He's afraid of the United States Senate, a Republican-controlled Senate. He's afraid to bring any measure to the floor on election security for what might happen on the floor of the United States Senate, because he realizes that even some Republicans have to acknowledge the obvious. Every major intelligence agency has confirmed the fact, as Mr. Mueller did in his report, that the Russians did everything they could think of to try to interfere in our 2016 election and are prepared to do the same next year in the 2020 election. We know this personally in Illinois. We believe we were the first state hit by the Russians. They found a wormhole into our voter file and ended up basically access to millions of voters' records in Illinois. Lucky for us, they didn't use that power to corrupt the election, as best we can find out. But they had that capacity, and they could have it again in virtually any state in the union. Now, we have sent money as a federal government to the states to help them upgrade their election procedures and efforts in security. But definitely more is needed. We have been warned in closed sessions about the about the Russian plans to corrupt this next election, and they're very specific. Some of the things that they have told us about the concerns really get down to a specific strategy that they could follow to try to corrupt this election. What are we doing about it? The answer is nothing. The reason? Mitch McConnell. He has decided it is just too dangerous to bring this issue to the floor of the United States Senate, and he'd really rather run the risk that we would have an election result that does not reflect a Democratic vote. That, to me, is a low point in the history of this country. Let me yield to Senator Ben Cardin of Maryland.
Well, thank you, Senator Durbin. But let me first thank Senator Warner for his leadership on the Intelligence Committee, working in a bipartisan way in order to get the information we know about the danger of Russia and what they are doing in attacking our system. The Mueller report was very clear. Mr. Putin and Russia used a comprehensive way to interfere in our elections in an effort to influence the outcome of that election. He spells it out very clearly in his report. He also makes it clear that Russia is continuing these efforts, and what we know very clearly that Russia will be engaged in the 2020 elections. In January of last year, I authored a report on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee that talked about Mr. Putin and his asymmetric arsenal on attack on democratic institutions. The report talked about the different tools he's used in Europe to try to undermine their election systems and their democratic institutions. We now know that Mr. Putin has done the same thing here in the United States. It's absolutely critical that we take steps to protect our free system and our elections. This is our responsibility to take those actions. I applaud the efforts of my colleagues to deal with our election infrastructure, to deal with transparency on political ads so we know what is happening, to deal with responsibilities that every campaign should have if approached by a foreign government in regards to our elections. These are extremely important bills. I've introduced legislation coming out of an experience we had in Maryland when we learned that one of the oligarchs, Mr. Putin, had a financial interest in our election services, including the voter rolls of Marylanders. We should know about that. We should take action to protect that. I want to applaud the House of Representatives. I am very proud of my congressman in the House of Representatives, John Sarbanes, H.R. 1, a comprehensive bill, the very first bill filed in this Congress that protects our election system from foreign interference. What are we doing in the Senate? Why hasn't Mitch McConnell allowed us to have a debate in the Senate about the protection of our basic democratic institution of free and fair elections? No, we don't want the Senate to be a graveyard. We want the Senate to bring up issues that are critically important. And we're calling on Mitch McConnell to let us have a debate on the floor of the United States Senate on these issues. The House has done the right thing. The Senate needs to take up this issue and debate this issue. And I'm proud to yield to my Congressman, John Sarbanes.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Cardin. Good afternoon, everybody. I trekked over here from the other side of the Capitol today to thank our Senate colleagues, our Democratic colleagues, for putting forth really important legislation to protect our democracy and to reinforce election security. We've tried to do what we can in the House, having the gavel. As Senator Cardin said, the first bill that we passed, H.R. 1, the For the People Act, includes very robust election security issues that protect our democracy at the ballot box, that protect us against foreign interference, against these disinformation campaigns that are coming at us from the Russians and others. So we had a whole group of candidates that came off the campaign trail in 2018 that we're hearing from Democrats, independents, and Republicans. We want you to protect our democracy. We want you to make sure that when we cast our ballot, we can have confidence in the result, in the tally, in the registration information that's there. And the first thing we did, we took that message, we harnessed it, we put it into H.R. 1, the For the People Act. Then the Mueller report came out that highlighted again what the Russians had done in the 2016 election. So recognizing that apparently Mitch McConnell does not want to take H.R. 1 and put it on the Senate floor, we decided to give him another chance. And we broke out the ballot box security provisions of H.R. 1 and put them into the SAFE Act, which we passed very recently. So that's piling up on the Senate side against the door that Mitch McConnell has barred when it comes to protecting our democracy. Tomorrow, as Senator Klobuchar said, we're going to hear again directly from Bob Mueller about what these attacks on our democracy were, and hopefully it will spike people's interest in making sure that we can reinforce our election security. Hopefully it'll get Mitch McConnell interested in this fundamental enterprise to make sure that Americans' democracy is secure and protected. So we're going to keep pushing as hard as we can, and I want to thank our Senate colleagues for doing that, for coming forward with good legislation, including companion legislation to what we've been able to achieve on the House side. The fact of the matter is that the alarm bells are going off, the lights are flashing, and Mitch McConnell is blithely sleepwalking through it all. We need him to take action to protect our democracy. My pleasure to turn it over to Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Congressman Sarbanes. My colleagues have said it very well, and I want to make a couple of points really quickly. The first is, as of this morning, hostile foreign actors are going to interfere in the 2020 election in a way that makes what happened in 2016 look like very small potatoes. And I tell you that as somebody who serves on the Senate Intelligence Committee. And I will tell you, it is not just going to be the Russians. We are going to have a host of hostile foreign actors, and that is based on what I know as a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee. That's point number one. Number two, Americans wouldn't expect a sheriff from a small town to defend against an attack from the Russian military. That's a job for the U.S. military. So, once again, when you're talking about national security issues, that was the point Senator Klobuchar made, you've got to attack it from a federal level. You don't just send local officials out to do it. They don't have the funds, for example. Just this last month, a Texas county purchased new paperless voting machines, which are a security nightmare because you can't go back and audit the results if something goes wrong. About a week ago, the Associated Press reported that election systems across the country depend on out-of-date software that will be obsolete by January. You couldn't have a riper target for hackers. And that problem is from sea to shining sea. And right now, there is absolutely nothing the federal government can do to stop states from buying these insecure election systems. And I'm going to close by just giving you kind of where things are from here. The House has done some very good work. Congressman Sarbanes, the Speaker, with their legislation, the SAFE Act, includes some of what I have offered over the years. What we're going to do now, Chair Klobuchar is working with all of us in the Senate. We're going to have a Senate version of the SAFE Act, which will make sure that the Senate and the House are on the same wavelength and treating this as a national security issue. And all through the summer recess, what my colleagues and I are going to do is we're basically going to be election security Paul Revere's. We are going to fan out all over the country and make it clear what my colleagues are saying is what the risk is. What the risk is to the 200-year experiment, 200-plus year experiment we have had in governance. This is not an abstract issue. Or the vice chair of the Intelligence Committee will tell you the same thing that I have told you. Political change isn't top down. It's bottoms up. So I feel when I'm up here with these talented senators, I'm running with the right crowd. And we are going to be election Paul Revere's, getting out to every corner of America what the security risk is. And then we'll close before questions with Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Senator Wyden. Paul Revere's on planes, not horses, I hope.
Well said.
But the idea is absolutely valid. The nation needs to be woke about this problem because election security is national security. Now, Mitch McConnell seems to take pride in being called, in fact, calling himself the Grim Reaper, killing legislation, making the Senate a graveyard. In this case, he is going to be the Grim Reaper for our democracy. And we have an obligation to convince our colleagues, but more importantly, the American people, that the Grim Reaper here is going to do lasting, irreparable damage to our democracy because we are under attack. It's not just flashing lights or alarm bells. It's an ongoing attack right now that will make 2016 look like a dress rehearsal for 2020. And we will know about it only after it occurs unless we prevent it now. There's no shortage of bills, of proposals, of ideas. What's needed is the will to make it happen. As you know, one of the most common questions around here is, what do the Russians have on Donald Trump? I think soon folks are going to be asking, what do the Russians have on Mitch McConnell? Why is he unwilling or unable to move forward with legislation to protect our democracy? There is no time to waste.
one of these measures is the Duty to Report Act. You would think it is common sense and simple morality that someone approached by a foreign government offering illegal aid would feel a duty to report it because it's illegal. The president equivocated on that topic. Why not make it clear? That's what the Duty to Report Act would do, as I have authored it, and I am proud to join my colleagues here and others in this effort to secure our democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dick. And thank all my colleagues. I know people are running off with the vote, but we'd be happy to take a couple of questions. Let's start on this matter. Please.
Senator, in the series of reports that the Intelligence Committee is releasing, do you anticipate a way to communicate this message about election security through those reports, and what has to happen for that to be completed?
Well, I'm very proud of the Senate Intelligence Committee's only bipartisan investigation that continues. As Chairman Burrs indicated, we hope to get one of the first of our series of reports out on election security. We'd already put some markers down earlier this year. I think that our report will fill that out, but we will, with great detail, document not only what the Russians did, but come up with a series of suggestions on how we would correct that. And many of those suggestions mirror some of the legislation we're talking about. Please.
Can you talk about the timing of holding this press conference? Are you hoping that this is what comes out, the message that comes out of Mueller's testimony tomorrow? Obviously, there's a lot of
And I'll let others comment on this as well, but you know, Bob Mueller did about a 10-minute press conference a month or two ago. He started and ended his comments saying the Russians attacked us and they will be back and America needs to be better protected. I do not understand, when we have common sense bipartisan legislation, why we can't bring that to the floor of the Senate and let the Senate vote. I think if we want to make sure that we're going to be fully protected, we need to have that chance. Does somebody else want to take that?
Yeah. That is why we're doing this right now. And the hope is that when the American people can focus on Bob Mueller's testimony tomorrow, the facts about Russia are so disturbing, and not everyone has time to read a 400-some page report. I'd also add that I was able to see the redacted parts of the judiciary piece of the report, the volume focused on that. But even as a member of the Judiciary Committee, not on intelligence, our committee couldn't read the redacted parts of the Russia piece of this, which I think is outrageous, and we are pursuing it with the Justice Department. But there is so much information beyond what Mueller is going to be able to testify about tomorrow. And so we just must continue focusing. We've got to get this unredacted. We've got to make the case. And time is ticking. There's not much time before the 2020 election. And especially with the social media bill, Lindsey Graham is my co-sponsor of that bill, the Honest Ads Act now. He took John McCain's place. There's no reason we shouldn't be able to advance that bill. And unlike some of the other ones with the backup paper ballots, we could completely change how they handle those ads going into 2020 now. And that's really disturbing that we're not getting that done. And then as the backup paper ballots, everything we can do to push the states works. We've seen minor improvements, but we want to see even more. Russia is well aware which of those states don't have backup paper ballots, which counties, which areas don't have them. Why are we risking this just because Mitch McConnell doesn't want to advance this, because he thinks it helps him, creates an advantage for his party? There were hundreds of thousands of people that lost their lives on the battlefields, as I said, on 4th of July, since this country was founded and going into it, just to protect democracy, just to protect the right to vote. 4 little innocent girls lost their lives in a church in Birmingham. They were innocents in that continual fight to protect the right to vote in this country. Mitch McConnell has got to allow these bills up for a vote.
I just want to add one point, because I agree with everything Senator Klobuchar has said. The reason that this is so important right now is, of course, Bob Mueller tomorrow, but I want you to have the timetable. Most election security specialists will tell you you've got to have the reforms up and running by 3-4 months from now. Now, obviously, that's a big lift. I mean, that means that early in the fall, you basically have got to be on your way, the fall of 2019, to making the reforms that, in effect, would govern the 2020 election. So you say to yourself, as my colleagues have said, we've got this obstructionist that we're facing in the United States Senate. How do you get it done? Well, we are about creating the sense of urgency, the sense of a national security priority, because when you do that, our country can really move fast. And if you follow what the election security specialists are saying, we have got to move really fast to get these reforms in place in the fall of 2019 in order to make sure that we have closed these massive loopholes that otherwise will threaten Americans in 2020.
Let me just say very quickly, these press conferences will continue because it would be malpractice not to be raising the alarm as we're doing when it comes to election security. It would be malpractice to have the information that we have as elected officials, as public officials, about the risks that are being posed to our democracy and to our election security, and not raise the alarm and want to take action. And it's malpractice for Leader McConnell to be barring every effective piece of legislation that would address this risk. And that's why we're going to keep beating on this drum and pressuring him to do the right thing.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Senator. Do you have any timing on when the intelligence report will be released? I know there was some talk about this week.
Again, this would just be part one of what will be 5 portions. And, it's been going through back and forth with the intelligence community, get appropriate things redacted and dealt with. But I'm hopeful we'll have some information on that maybe later today or tomorrow.
Senator, a lot of people have said about the 2016 election that there was a failure of imagination in some of the ways that there have been foreign interference. And we've heard a lot today about how 2020 could be even worse. Can you kind of tell us what you know about how the modes of interference or the forms of interference might change and shift from 2016 to 2020 so the public has a better sense of how that might be different?
Let me speak to that, and then let me ask Dick Blumenthal, since he voted and came back upstairs as well. There were 3 ways in 2016. We saw hacking into personal information and selective release of that information. We saw all of our election systems attempted to be penetrated, and as Dick Durbin pointed out, places like Illinois, there was penetration. And we saw manipulation and creation of fake accounts and political advertising on social media. What we also saw, as we did our investigation, was what the Russians did in America, they did in the Brexit vote. They did in the French presidential elections. And one of the reasons we know they're going to be back is that if you add up all the Russians spent interfering in our elections, Brexit, and the French presidential elections, it was less than the cost of 1 new F-35 airplane. So this is both cheap and effective, number one. Number two, one of the things that I think we'll see, and we've already seen how this can be manipulated even using relatively crude technology when there were efforts made to kind of show a doctored video of Speaker Pelosi that I thought Facebook was extraordinarily irresponsible in not taking down. But maybe the single greatest new threat from at least a social media standpoint is the use of deep fakes, where any one of us here can have our image replaced and our voice replicated so that if seeing is believing, the ability for a foreign government or foreign entity to manipulate the images of any of our political candidates to appear to say something they're not saying is really one of the most, I think, one of the most chilling aspects. And that's going to take both legislative activity, it's going to take law enforcement, but it's also going to take a greater collaboration from the social media companies than we've seen to date. Dick, do you want to add?
Yeah, I would just add one quick point. We've had hearings in the Commerce and Judiciary Committees about social media. And if there's one word that sums it up, algorithms. In this era, algorithms will amplify and magnify false, purposely untrue messages, much like atomic fission. in the nuclear age. We have no real understanding. Even the social media companies have been candid that they have no real understanding about the power of algorithms to magnify false messages. And so the threat has been increased exponentially by the social media forums that provide an opportunity for interference purposefully that is magnified not only inexpensively but uncontrollably. And I think that is one of the distinguishing factors. I agree with Senator Warner about all of the others as well, but it will be more sophisticated, more driven, and more varied because it's not going to be only the Russians. I mean, it's like a shooting range where everybody gets to take a shot. And that's what the hackers and the smaller nations think. Iran, do you think they're going to be out of the picture here? They're going to welcome a chance to interfere in our democracy. They'll be laughing all the way to their Facebook accounts and all the other opportunities that present themselves because it's inexpensive, it's effective, and it is extraordinarily destructive.
And I'll add just one last point on that, Tim. I think it will be also an election that really focuses on people's personal devices. You know, what we saw in 2016, John Podesta, was just the beginning. You know, government is kind of trying to play catch-up ball now and put in, you know, rules. But if you ask me about one huge new vulnerability, and you would think on the basis of what happened in 2016, people would have gotten the wake-up call. I think personal devices and the risk that that presents to both personal and national security will be a major target in 2020.
We'll add one other quick item, and some of the legislation that we've proposed takes on this. When we think about election security, we think about sometimes the security of the machines, the security of the count. But one of the concerns I have is there are three companies that basically, private companies that manage about 90% of the voter files. I mean, the bad guys don't have to come in and change an election result. If the bad guys simply come in and move a lot of voters from one precinct to another, the chaos that would create would be overwhelming. We'll take one last question, or if no more. Yes, sir.
What are how many Republican co-sponsors will all this package have in the Senate?
In the last Congress, for example, on the Election Security Act, we had a very broad range of Republican co-sponsors. There has been some pressure from the White House to try to water that legislation down that is very discouraging. But I believe we get a bipartisan bill, particularly around election security, particularly around issues like paper ballot backups, where you have uniform agreement from secretaries of state virtually across the whole country. I still think we'd get 80 votes.
Let me add one more point. I would like to thank Congressman Sarbanes for being over here, but more importantly for his leadership. You know, senators tend to spread themselves pretty thin. He is really focused on this issue in a very, very effective and determined and courageous way. So I'm really proud that he's here with us, but that the House made it H.R. 1. Mitch McConnell has made it Senate 0, but we're going to fight to change that.
And are you
Thanks.
saying, Dick, that occasionally we're scattered?
Just others, not present company not included.
Thank you all very much, and look forward to tomorrow. Thank you all.